Hello, everyone, and welcome to this EGR virtual series webinar in partnership with Sportradar. We are delighted to have you all join us virtually today as we discuss how cricket could hold the key to global growth for sportsbook operators. This is, of course, a timely discussion with Australia just recently crowned winners of the T20 World Cup, and the Ashes set to begin in a couple of weeks. So what better opportunity to discuss the increasing popularity we're seeing in cricket amongst sports bettors and its growing importance to sportsbook operators. My name is Katie Renton, Event Content Manager at EGR Global. I will be moderating today's discussion, and I am delighted to be joined by speakers Dalraj Bahia, Managing Director, Operations, Betting and Gaming at Sportradar, and Sam Taylor, Managing Director at InteractSport. Welcome to you both. So before we dive in, first of all, I'd like to give both of our speakers a chance to further introduce themselves. So Dalraj, if we could start with you.
Sure. So firstly, thank you, Katie and EGR, for hosting us today. And to those in the audience listening in, thank you for taking the time to join us. My name's Dalraj Bahia, and I'm the Managing Director of Operations at Sportradar, specifically within our betting and gaming vertical, and working with our Chief Product Officer to manage a global team to lead and develop Sportradar's suite of betting and gaming products. So the products I help look after basically covers the end-to-end betting lifecycle or value chain, going all the way from pre-match services through to live data, live odds, managed betting services, and various other complementary products. So basically each and every building block of the betting value chain through to all-encompassing turnkey solutions and engagement products and services. And that value chain includes our premium cricket service, or PCS, which will be a key focus of our discussion over the next hour or so. And I'm very glad to be joined today by my colleague Sam, who I'll let introduce himself.
Thanks, Dalraj. Yeah, so Sam Taylor, I'm the Managing Director of InteractSport, a company that was recently acquired by Sportradar. I live and work in Melbourne, Australia. Our mission ultimately at InteractSport is to create the world's most intelligent cricket platform. And we do that with the goal of allowing every person to connect with cricket. So I guess ultimately my role, as I define it, is to facilitate the execution of that vision. I try and do that by ultimately building a world-class team and trying to make good decisions on a daily basis to allow those really smart people, smarter people than I am, to be enabled to deliver on ultimately what it is that we're trying to do. I've spent the majority of my professional life designing digital products for cricket, and the majority of my professional sporting career playing the game, both in Australia and the UK. So I'm really excited to be here. Very timely, as you point out, Katie, to be spending an hour talking about cricket, given the recent events in the recent tournament, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a bit.
Lovely. Well, thank you both so much. We're delighted to be joined by you both. So, Dalraj, let's turn our attention towards the topic at hand. Could you give us a bit of an overview into Sportradar generally and the work that you do with regards to cricket?
Sure. So we as Sportradar, we're the #1 sports technology company globally, and our mission is to create immersive experience for sports fans and bettors across the world. So there's various stats on the page, which I won't regurgitate, but we've been at the forefront of the industry since we were founded, and we're the one-stop shop service provider for the betting industry all across the value chain, from just pre-match all the way through to platform services, AV and OTT streaming, entertainment tools, programmatic advertising, integrity solutions to protect the entire industry, and so on. And we pride ourselves on continuing to innovate our technology solutions to keep driving the industry forward, as we have done for the past 20 years. And a big part of that innovation is focusing on and investing in sports which will drive future growth for the industry and for our customers. And as a result, we've invested heavily in cricket over recent years with the ongoing development of our premium cricket service, and of course with our acquisition of Interact earlier this year as well. Now, some will say that we can't be a proper cricket team without a couple of Aussies in the mix, which may or may not have been a key reason for the Interact acquisition. But I'll let Sam chat you through Interact and our sports solution vertical a bit more, because it's a really critical part of our overall strategy.
Yeah, perfect. Over to you, Sam.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, look, ultimately, we are about building, in our vertical, InteractSport as a business, throughout its time has really been about establishing deep and close sort of partnerships with cricket boards throughout the world. We currently work with the ICC, Cricket Australia, the ECB, 3 of the biggest cricket boards globally, as well as several, many of the associate nations such as Cricket Scotland, the Netherlands, and others. I guess, we partner with these boards with the goal of enabling them to reach their strategic goals. Ultimately, that is, and typically growth in participation of the sport, engagement with their fans and their audience. And also, of course, there are commercial outcomes that drive, as not-for-profits, those commercial outcomes typically drive further investment in the game. So we're about enabling them to create a circular economy. So, as an example, both Cricket Australia and the ECB utilise currently our automated streaming platform. It's an almost humanless live streaming service, allows them to capture more content than they've ever captured before, for anything where non-linear traditional broadcast is economically viable. So they're able to capture more content, reach a wider audience, and we're really excited about being part of that journey with them. Obviously, being a partner and being so close to those boards allows us a really unique opportunity to understand their needs, their objectives, and their pain points, and we use that to propel our ongoing innovation in the platform and the product.
Fantastic. And if we just move to the next slide, let's talk about the men's T20 World Cup, which, of course, as we said, sort of came to its conclusion a couple of weeks ago. So, Dalraj, can you sort of talk about this from a sports betting perspective, and also a bit of fan engagement perspective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll chat through our views on the World Cup, how we saw things, and then we'll come on to the size of the cricket opportunity, which is what everyone's most interested in. So the World Cup. World Cups in any sport are critical events, super popular globally for obvious reasons. But cricket is actually unique given its multi-format. So we're thankfully not left waiting every 4 years like we are in football. And we're spoilt with T20, one-dayers, now even the World Test Championship. So for this T20 World Cup, unfortunately, the Aussies won, and let's leave it at that. But from a betting perspective, the most popular match was, as one would expect, the final. But actually, India versus Pakistan in the group stages wasn't far behind. On our platform, we saw nearly €1,000 per second being staked on the final, closely followed by the India game. In terms of most popular markets, again, as one would expect, it was kind of dominated by match winner, but actually quite closely followed by over-under next over runs, and then various other ancillary player markets, which we'll come on to talk about, which is a bit surprising, actually, and it's not like other sports, but we'll come on to that. But it was a really amazing tournament to drive punter acquisition. The industry-wide turnover statistics are pretty astonishing, even to a cricket fan like myself. So if we go back to the 2019 World Cup, because that's the latest kind of industry-wide statistics that we've got out there to refer to, both the semi-finals and the final of that World Cup were more than double the amount of industry-wide turnover versus the Football World Cup the year before, which is just staggering to think about. The semi-final, I think, between, I think it was India and New Zealand, was almost triple that of the Football World Cup final. That's the level of fan and punter interest in cricket, which not a lot of people appreciate. Everyone seems to think of soccer and football as the main dominant sport. Cricket's not actually that far behind. And in terms of overall fan engagement, I'll kick it over to Sam to chat through some of the metrics that he sees.
Yeah, thanks, Dalraj. Look, the tournament itself, I think, was a huge success. Obviously, somewhat biased as an Aussie and pleased with the result, but I think the ICC themselves, deserve a great deal of credit. I think they got the balance right in terms of the way that the tournament was structured. The participating teams, the group, Super 12 and final stages. Personally, as a cricket tragic, I love the early games between the associate members as they sort of fight for their position in the Super 12s. And just with the way that balance was, the T20 format allows this. It felt like there was a blockbuster game, each and every day of what is quite a tightly packed schedule. So, I think the fan engagement numbers really speak to the quality of the way that the tournament was structured and run. The numbers are in and they're big. The ICC, has had seen over 4 billion total video views across the tournament. Nearly 50 million users visited the ICC digital assets, so their website and their native fan app, and their sort of net increase in social media followings was about 7 million users. So the sheer size of the tournament, I think, speaks to the global popularity of cricket itself, but also the quality of the way that the tournament was run. And of course, we can't forget the quality of the cricket. The skill level of the players, the tactics. Both of those things are evolving at such an incredible pace in the T20 format that it really does make it a much must-watch event on a global scale. So, yeah, really fascinating as a cricket fan to watch and be part of the tournament itself.
And as cricket fans, and while we're on it, what did you think of the World Cup from a personal perspective, from a fan perspective? Dalraj, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm glad I get to go first while Sam prepared his smug comment. So I'm an India fan first and foremost, and actually England second. So despite being able to hedge my bets, it was not a good tournament. But if I leave that aside and leave aside, Aussies probably ball tampering again, and the undeniable fact that coin tosses shouldn't really decide matches, yet Aaron Finch somehow managed to win 6 out of 7 tosses. Go figure. All that aside, it was a great tournament as a fan and for the industry. It was great to see cricket, back in full force, fans in the stadium. It was a bit of a shame that it had to be held at a neutral venue, as it did limit the fan effect a bit. But no, it was a great tournament, some great matches, some great moments. If you look at both the semi-finals, actually, you had Wade and his questionable mustache smashing 3 sixes to win one of the games. That was an incredible finish. In the other semi-final, I think it was Jimmy Neesham and Daryl Mitchell doing something similar. So in both those semis with 4 or 5 overs to go, both New Zealand and the Aussies were odds on to lose, and there was a great turnaround. So yeah, great entertainment and an engagement for fans and punters, even if unfortunately it's fans like Sam that are left happiest at the end of it.
And Sam, how was it for you?
Yes, look, I won't touch too much on the result. That's probably not a smart career move for me at the moment. But what I did love as a cricket fan is, touched on briefly earlier, the evolving tactics of the T20 game. I'm absolutely fascinated by that. We saw for the first time just the use of matchups. I think that's really a critical component these days, that we saw captains making decisions around who would bowl the next over based on who was on strike. You've got players such as Aaron Finch that have a real discrepancy in their strike rate against the ball spinning into the bat versus away from the bat, and captains were armed with that data, something that obviously, being in the business I absolutely love, and they're taking that data and it's informing on-field tactics. It's also informing markets, and more importantly, or equally as importantly, the entertainment side. We're starting to bring some of that data into the lounge room and really educate fans along the way. So for me, the tactics, watching Australia ultimately win the tournament, and New Zealand, they were the 2 teams in the final that used pace bowling the most, which bucks a bit of a recent trend in the high use of spin bowling in the T20 game. So fascinating sort of from a tactical point of view, and at the end of the day, being able to sit up late at night to pretend you're working and watch a cricket tournament is a pretty good way to go about living your life. So pretty pleased.
Definitely. So now to sort of turn to sort of cricket more generally. So Dalraj, could you talk us through the size of the opportunity, as we've sort of mentioned already, in terms of its growing popularity as a sport generally, and also from a sports betting point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the statistics on this page kind of speak for themselves, but it's really the global fan base of cricket that drives the scale of the opportunity that we're talking about. It's such a massive cricket fan base. It's arguably the sport with the biggest following globally. It's really powered on, I think, by the massive subcontinental expat community globally. So if you look at nascent countries, even in North America, like Canada, it's starting to really come through with cricket popularity, predominantly driven by subcontinental expats. Same story in European countries, they're powering on too, all in addition to the core cricket markets that we all know about, like England, Australia, South Africa, and so on. the betting figures are pretty surprising. So there's some figures on the slide there with regards to our estimate of the turnover in regulated markets at 6 billion plus, which is a big number. Around a third of that we estimate to be UK, 2/3 rest of world. And cricket is already our fourth biggest sport, which is incredible when you consider that cricket normally is spoken about as niche in the betting world. It isn't niche. You know, the Cricket World Cup turnover per match that we were discussing earlier, already outstripping Football World Cup. And it certainly won't be niche when and if the mammoth subcontinental markets regulate in the future. Some people estimate that when that happens, that market could be bigger than the US. It could be in the realm of 10 to 15 times as big as that regulated number there in steady state long term when and if all of the countries in the subcontinent do regulate. Now, who knows the veracity of those estimates given its kind of long-term finger in the air estimates, but it's definitely big scale driven by that fan base, and that's why we're spending a lot of time, effort and investment focusing on cricket in the subcontinent. It's one of the next frontiers from our perspective. And with that in mind, it's the perfect time to drive cricket. We've got a massive fixture pile-up post-COVID. This T20 World Cup was the one from last year that was postponed. So we've got another one next year. Then the one-day World Cup the year after. We've got nations touring straight after. New Zealand, India, 2 days after the World Cup final, we're playing in India. It was just crazy. Got the Ashes coming up. So there's just a lot of top-tier volume, which is great for fans and punters. And I should also mention the women's game. We're seeing incredibly high interest in women's cricket, more so than any other sport. So if we look at football, for example, you've got men's football here and women's football here in terms of betting interest. When you go to cricket, the gap is far closer. It's already on another level. And the 100 tournament in England a couple of months ago now, I think it was, did a great job at raising the profile for women's cricket. And that's just another reason to be excited about the overall opportunity here.
Fantastic. And again, if we move over to the next slide, can you talk us through a little bit about the premium cricket service?
Sure. So this is about kind of translating that massive opportunity into reality for our operators. So we're going to talk about the products and services that are required to address the market and then ultimately drive revenue growth. So if we start with the basics and cover these really quickly before coming on to PCS, we as Sportradar obviously provide the baseline products that the audience will likely already know about. So starting with pre-match services, of course, we've got fixture creation, pre-match odds. There's no point in really dwelling on that or going into more detail because it is so foundational, but we've got that covered. But then moving into live, which is where the majority of the value is, given the scale of in-play betting and the requirement for low latency services, starting off with live data. So that's the required rich, low latency, ball-by-ball data for operators to trade matches themselves. So built-in feed redundancy, both operationally and technically, super low latency, everything an operator needs to trade for him or herself. But then that brings us on to this slide, which is PCS, or Premium Cricket Service. So for those familiar with our value chain, PCS is essentially pre-match and live odds for cricket. Of course, powered by live data, and again, super low latency. But the difference here is we've got a dedicated team of cricket experts, frankly geeks like Sam, who are absolutely specialists when it comes to cricket betting, odds modelers, statisticians, developers, traders, an entire end-to-end team solely dedicated to cricket. And I have to give a shout out to that team because I know they'll be listening and they really do a great job. They are the best in the industry, and that's not questionable. And that's why this for us is a real difference maker. That's what PCS is for our customers. And our unique expertise therefore allows us to have the market leading coverage like you see on the slide, which is more than double the market average. We've got number one market depth, so over 150 in-play markets compared to average operators with more like 10 to 20. And that includes extensive player markets to drive fan engagement, all ready for the subcontinent as well, with support for back and lay and Lambie market presentation. We've got leading suspension rates, so averaging around 5%. Our main markets are actually only suspended for 1% of the time, thanks to our technology solutions. and that compares to 20% suspension time when you look at alternative market offerings. We've got the fastest market refresh or return times. So for example, when a wicket falls, we're back with our main markets in 10 to 15 seconds. Others take 30 seconds or even minutes to get back to the market and start being able to take in volume. And then finally, we've got rapid settlements of under 2 minutes on average to drive churn of wallet. And based on our data, we actually see that next over runs, like I was mentioning earlier, isn't far behind match winner from a turnover popularity perspective. And that just shows the power of rapid settlement engagement throughout a match. So yeah, sharpest pricing in the industry, meaning that even with extremely aggressive, i.e. low odds keys and high limits to drive turnover, we average around 5% plus margin, including on specialty markets. For those who know cricket and the type of business that cricket attracts, that is pretty impressive. And we're also able to provide what we call simulated reality matches via PCS, which we can chat more about later. But yeah, a lot of points here to showcase how good PCS is. But I always think proof is kind of in the pudding. So even if you ignore all that and we just land on one statistic, we measure our customers' cricket performance before coming to PCS and then after. And when we measure like-for-like cricket games, we measure a turnover increase of nearly 4 times and a profit increase of nearly 8 times their previous solution. So we are the deepest, sharpest, quickest provider of cricket pricing and technology in the industry, and that's why we're able to drive an 8 times profit uplift for our customers when they move to PCS. And if we then move to the next slide, and I can just kind of segue this together, we're then able to package all that unique cricket expertise from PCS with the next level up on the outsourcing journey to managed trading services, or MTS. So this is where we manage risk and liability for our operators. So you can plug in your own in-house platform, various other partner platforms, or our own platform if you want a turnkey solution. And we've got proven higher margin and profit performance driven by our extensive AI and machine learning-led player profiling, not just for risk management, but for the end-to-end punter journey. And so to link this back to what we were mentioned briefly earlier about acquisition and retention, MTS is a holistic offering that can include various marketing and player services to better drive revenue by taking into account the entire end-to-end punter journey. So, for example, we've got easy integration to work with our programmatic advertising proposition called Ads, which enables you to gain insights and more efficiently drive your decision-making as an operator to maximize turnover and GGR. And this is really, really important when we talk about maximizing the cricket opportunity and driving long-term value. So whilst we as Sportradar, we're a B2B company, we still know that to offer the best technology and the best products and services for our customers, we have to live and breathe B2B to C. So what does that mean? It means understanding and facilitating the understanding of the end punter, the end cricket fan, how he or she behaves, the end consumer, hence B2B2C. And that then helps you really drive value by mobilizing your customer base and vastly improving acquisition and retention efficiency. So like I said, through MTS integration, our ad solutions are a switch away. We're able to offer a full service marketing platform. And again, what does that mean? Just as an example, it means stuff like AI-driven bet recommendations. So either a simple API or a dedicated front-end widget, which takes minutes to integrate, that can then present real-time, highly relevant and proven engagement for our punters.
And what sort of player insights are we talking about, and why is it differentiated? Do you have an example of this?
Sure, good question. So we've got extensive possible player and punter insights. So for example, around customer lifetime value, churn predictions, repeat visit predictions. So for example, using our deep learning tools, we can perform early value segmentation and predict player value using only 3 days of data to within 80% accuracy on the value of that player. Whereas most other BI functions typically require several weeks of data to start predicting player value in an accurate manner. So we can do it in 3 days. We can easily integrate that into the majority of CRM services. And that means operators can then really focus their investments on the highest predicted player values. So that's real differentiation. And that includes personalized fan journeys, personalized recommendations, like I said, based on favorite cricket teams or what's just happened in a match in a given over as a key wicket falls in a run chase. So it's really, really pioneering technology to drive retention and increase lifetime value. And that really is ultimately the value of MTS, because it enables access to so many other ancillary services, which are crucial to understanding and optimizing the player journey. So this, finishing with MTS and even platform services, which we haven't spoken about, which is more of a turnkey solution. This is ultimately the end kind of wrapper around the betting value chain that we've been talking about. And of course, there's so many steps along the way there. But the foundation of it all, of course, is the data collection and the close partnerships and collaborations that we have with the cricketing boards themselves.
And great sort of segue for me to ask my next question to Sam. So on the partnership front, how do you work with cricket boards, and what value do you bring?
Yeah, well, I guess ultimately, if we come back to the sort of genesis of our product suite, ultimately what we're about is sort of addressing the converging needs of high performance, betting, and entertainment. So, we really take a view that, we need to bring the same data that is being utilized in high performance back rooms of elite teams into lounge rooms of fans. To better educate, an audience. An educated audience is a highly engaged audience, and I think we all understand the value of having that engaged customer. So, specifically, what we've gone and developed is a data capture solution that, for the first time, meets each of those unique needs. So, you go back even sort of 6 months, and if you were to attend a cricket match, an international game of cricket, you would have up to 6 operators or scorers, scouts, collecting data ultimately for their own purposes. So a broadcaster needs certain information to display on screen. Betting information needs to be collected in a certain way at a certain latency for those purposes. You have the official scoring, you have high performance data, and then you have the media and entertainment and fan app side of things. Ultimately, we looked at that and felt that with some automation, some smarts, considerations around the sequencing of how we capture data, we're able to meet the needs of each of those. So what you end up with is, instead of a many-to-many relationship, a one-to-many capture to multiple distributors, but we're giving them that data exactly how they need it, in the latencies that they need that information, which is absolutely critical when you're talking about the integrity of data. So that the official scoring information is the same data being delivered to other platforms and applications. Obviously, there is a bit of a cyclical nature to that as well, where we have elite data, powering and informing some of the information that we're providing in the lead up, as well as part of predictive algorithms and so on. So, utilizing the product and structuring it in the way that we have automation. We're using WebSocket distribution, which means we have the absolute lowest latency of any product in the market as a data capture tool for rapid distribution of the content. And then we have, our reliability, given that we are powering the official scoring, the scoreboards, all of that. You can understand the need to have, multiple layers of redundancy. And just to give one little example of that, during the World Cup, where we were the official data providers, we had a quite devastating sort of local outage of internet at one of the venues, and we were able to seamlessly flick over and take a satellite broadcast and remotely code the game from a bunker in Melbourne, as part of a sort of, this was the worst case that you can have in terms of failures of internet outside of our control, and to be able to seamlessly do that, ensure that all the digital properties that are engaging that, that audience that we spoke about of engaged fans was quite seamless and ultimately went unnoticed, which is really our job.
And so fan engagement, Sam, is clearly important. So what specifically, how does Sportradar facilitate that to drive value for the entire cricket ecosystem?
Yeah, for us, the fan engagement side of things is really about education. Again, we are all about bringing high performance data into the pockets, the lounge rooms of fans right around the world. And the more that we can educate them on what's happening in the game, the tactics, why has the field been changed? Why is it likely, why is Aaron Finch bowling this particular bowler to this batsman? What is he likely to do next? And what data underpins that for us is really about, the more that we can educate people about the game, the more that they'll, fall in love with it, just the way that I have, understanding richly what is happening in the game. And I think that applies to any sport, really does build that sort of, with those deeper insights, I think becomes a deeper sort of passion for the game. And that's really ultimately what we're all about.
And what about engaging specifically with bettors? Dalraj, potentially you could take this one.
Yeah, sure. So it's very, very similar to how Sam sees the overall fan side of things. But, we spoke just now about MTS and ads and why that's a powerful combination for engagement and driving value. So it's kind of the same thing, really, when we talk about, personalized bet recommendations and so on and so forth. But if we take that to mean, what does that mean from an outcome perspective? We use various control groups to measure engagement when we talk about our services and what that actually means. And for just to use an example, for one operator that we work with, our services resulted in a 60% increase in number of bets placed and an 80% increase in turnover. We found that some marketing campaigns were just outright unprofitable. And, for one operator, we were able to reduce their cost per acquisition by 80%. So we talk a lot about engagement and how to do that, but it's the outcomes which actually are really, really interesting from a betting perspective in terms of what engagement means. And of course, we've got various other products that are aimed at fan engagement. So we spoke earlier about the PCS player markets, for example, and we've seen with our data and tracking of player journeys that the PCS player markets are really important for fan acquisition. So we'll see punters, fans signing up and placing their first bets on these types of novelties, or reactivating, i.e. logging in after a prolonged period having been with another platform to look at these markets, and then staying on the platform, engaging on the core markets or on other sports. So these special or novelty type markets are critical as turnover drivers in and of themselves, but also as an acquisition and retention tool to drive engagement. We've also got a product called Simulated Reality by PCS that I mentioned earlier, and it's an AI-driven product that uses data from tens of thousands of historical matches to simulate the real game, therefore creating a betting experience that's very close to real life. And that really drives engagement. So we run Simulated Reality across various sports leagues and tournaments, and we've seen that 70% of the punters who bet on Simulated Reality then go on to bet on the real match later in the day, and betting in far higher volume as well. And we've seen hundreds of millions of euros of turnover on Simulated Reality since it was launched. So that really, really brings to life the value of such a product to engage fans, given cricket isn't a 24/7 sport. There are downtimes in the calendar. If we talk about more visual engagement products, if we can flip to the next slide, we've got various in our betting entertainment tools division, but the key is our cricket live match tracker, which is shown here. So essentially, like our other sports, we're visualizing the real-time data that gets collected to bring storytelling and insights to fans to keep them engaged. So I don't know if the audience can see the detail on the right, but we've got up top, basic information you'd expect around score, over, scorecard, loads of other statistics, lineups, etc. And then with the video, not sure if you've had a chance to see it, or maybe we can play it again just to look at it once more. You'll see ball placement. So, I think this one is like a full toss. What sort of shot? So sweep, and then a visualized outcome. So like a 4 or a 6. We're often able to include ball speed, and then we have it showcased like you see there on the wagon wheel directly. So it provides fans with highly relevant analytics, insights, and visuals to inform their betting decisions and keep them involved as the match progresses. And it's optimized for mobile. So as you can see on the right, there are flexible placement options to ensure that the tracker stays visible as a punter scrolls through the markets. And it really lends itself as a second screen experience when a fan is watching a match live. You can dig into statistics on demand, look at the scorecard, who's got overs left, who's left to bat. How does that inform my view as a fan on what I think about the over-under lines being offered? It's just crucial for the betting experience for punters to visualize what's happening in play and stimulate them. It's especially valuable if they're not watching the live broadcast, because it offers that sense of reassurance that they're part of the action, and it keeps their engagement high. And in our experience, based on real data, it can significantly increase engagement and turnover. So this is a great visual way of us thinking about engagement and what we're doing with our fans as a result. And in a similar vein, finally, if we flip to the next slide, we've got our virtuals product. So like I mentioned earlier, cricket is not a 24/7 sport. Unlike soccer, where there's typically always a soccer match going on somewhere in the world to a decent level. In cricket, there's a lot of downtime. In a given day, you might have one good international, a few okay domestic games, but they're typically all at the same time because there's only one country, one season playing at that given time in the calendar. And that's where our virtual cricket and simulated reality products come in. So we mentioned simulated reality. We can talk about that more later if useful. But virtuals for now. So for those who aren't familiar, our virtuals product is exactly what it says on the tin. So it's virtual cricket, which provides various betting opportunities 24/7. So if we play the video, you should be able to see what that actually means. So as you can see, it's an attractive virtual build-up. It'll obviously be team branded, so we'll have an IPL version launching shortly with teams from Delhi, Punjab, etc., or your typical pre-match and live markets. It's unique to the market as an in-play product, so you can see next ball runs, for example, in this video. We've got back and lay market representation that will be available, and it's effortless integration via our remote gaming server once the product is fully launched early next year. So we've got one even more example. There you go. Lovely ball, lovely ball. So yeah, we've seen ongoing high interest from fans on virtual products overall. And that's the really interesting thing that makes this such an engagement product and difference maker, because we always see, it's really interesting, you always see upticks in interest around key tournaments as cricket punters, for example, are active on the platform looking for cricket engagement. And then those same punters tend to be super active on the real matches. So it not only fills downtime, but it also helps drive real betting turnover, again, from an acquisition and retention perspective. So very similar to the simulated reality value prop, but just a different, more visual way of addressing that market need.
And could you actually tell us a bit more about the technology behind simulated reality? It seems like a really interesting and unique product, but how does it actually work?
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, the product is based on our vast database of historical matches dating back tens of years. And it's built on all the ball-by-ball event data that we have within our data lake. So when we say AI-driven, the deep learning technology basically takes the teams that are scheduled to play, the lineups that are scheduled to play, player by player, and it pulls all the ball-by-ball data for those players and then stitches it together to create a completely unique game that still reflects that team, those players, those matchups, and normal match play. So what does that mean? If we use an example like in the World Cup, if we run an India versus Australia simulated game, you'll have David Warner opening up. The machine learning will reflect how Warner typically plays. It may not simulate him being a chirpy so-and-so on the field, but it will simulate him typically going all guns blazing from the outset. On the other side for India, you'll have KL Rahul opening up, and he will generally take a more cautious approach to anchor the innings. Not all the time, of course, but the technology reflects reality, given it uses all the historical data to stitch a game together and then accounts for a match situation, player matchups, etc. And that's why we call it simulated reality, because it literally simulates each and every ball depending on the players involved and the match situation, i.e. the score at a given time. So it's really cool technology because it therefore acts as a predictive tool for real matches. So we see a lot of interest in it as a result, and it's a great, unique product, therefore, to drive engagement. So on that note, actually, conscious of time, if we take a step back and try and kind of wrap things up and recap a little bit. So we've spoken about the foundational kind of market leading product in PCS. We've spoken about engagement to drive revenue through like match trackers, player markets, virtual simulator reality, and so on. And Sam also took us through the kind of federation and broader fan side of the equation, which is incredibly important from a holistic end-to-end standpoint. But for our betting customers out there, to finish up, I think the real value we've spoken about isn't all these isolated products that we've chatted through one by one. The difference for your customer base really comes when we start to piece it all together. So, for example, putting a wrapper around PCS and simulated reality by using MTS and ads and the player and marketing services that we discussed, linking it all together and breaking down the typical silos that continue to exist between trading functions and operator marketing functions within CRM functions, to then derive the best fan insights from start to finish, and then using that to drive more value. And for me, that's where the real value creation lies, to make the most out of such a huge opportunity like cricket over the coming years. And Sportradar, we're here to help make that a reality.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your insights on this topic today. And there's clearly huge future potential with cricket, and it's really excited to hear all about this and about what Sportradar are doing. But before we sort of fully wrap up, I do have a few final questions for you both. So first of all, Dalraj, you were talking a bit earlier about sort of regulation and what might be coming up in the future. Do you have any further thoughts on this, on sort of the growth potential with cricket and the future of regulation and how those marry up?
Sure. So from our perspective, it's kind of a given to expect solid market growth from the core existing regulated markets today in UK, Europe, Australia, etc. So they're all really critical and commercially important. And that's the primary reason for our cricket focus, because we've got a solid base for growth that exists regardless of what happens for future regulation elsewhere. Now, that being said, of course, regulation going forward is super interesting, and it's something that a lot of operators are going to be thinking about. But it's always really, really difficult to second guess, especially the timing of it. But I actually draw some parallels between the subcontinent today, so India, for example, versus how the US has evolved over the past few years. So, for example, the PASPA appeal in the US was in 2018. And we as Sportradar could never have perfectly predicted the timing of that, the when, or the how, in terms of how the states would open up and regulate. But we were pretty confident that the if was going to happen, that it was a matter of time. And that's why one of the reasons why we invested organically in the early 2010s, inorganically in the US with acquisitions, I think as early as 2013. So it was 5 years before the repeal. And official partnerships like the NBA ahead of the curve and integrity deals ahead of the curve as well. So when it comes to the subcontinent and regulation of those cricket fanatic countries like India that we spoke about, we don't know the when or the specifics around how, but we are of the belief that more of the subcontinent is likely to regulate eventually, and that it's more of a matter of when, not if. And so we are therefore of the belief that this massive fan base will ultimately translate into a big opportunity for the industry. And we mentioned some numbers earlier that are potentially even bigger than the US based on some metrics. And so to be well positioned for that potential, we've continually developed our market leading PCS product, like we mentioned. We've acquired great cricket centric businesses like Interact. We're partnering with key federations and stakeholders. We've even developed a market-leading kabaddi product, which is a niche sport for the subcontinent, which many people won't even have heard of. But again, massive out there, number two to cricket. And perhaps most importantly, we've invested heavily in integrity to make sure that we can protect the industry when it needs us most, which is as regulation comes through on the journey. That's a key part of our ICC deal. And we're partnering with the biggest cricket boards out there, like BCCI. Starting last year, for example, we provisioned our full integrity services in partnership with the BCCI for the IPL. So, yeah, we can't tell you when, we can't tell you how, but ultimately the global market is only going one way when it comes to regulation from our perspective, and that's great, and it's a good thing to make sure that regulations are in place to protect all stakeholders involved. The US is just the latest example of that, but there are many more to come, including countries on the subcontinent.
Absolutely. And we've spoken a lot about fan engagement, and potentially this is a phrase or an idea that gets thrown around a lot, particularly in the betting world. So I'd be interested to know, what does it really mean for you, and what one thing is most critical in your view? So Sam, if I could ask that to you first.
Yeah, I think I've touched on several times about educating the fan is the number one thing that we're focused on in fan engagement. Specifically, what we're looking at and what our data is exploring at the moment is tactical and sort of player value analysis. So a big focus for us at the moment is what we think of as being ultimately the third and often forgotten skill of cricket, fielding and wicket keeping. So to truly understand the value of a player in a world that is becoming more and more franchise-based in cricket, players are being purchased on a regular basis, and we still feel there is a gap of understanding the true value of a player because not all the data is being considered. So weighing up their ability, their batting, bowling, and fielding, and looking beyond traditional measures of just batting average and bowling average to assess a player's value, we think is critical to the tactics that underpin the game, the way that players are valued and purchased and paid, but ultimately then educating the fan around that and allowing them to make choices around how they might structure certain teams that they are building in certain platforms and other things, how they follow the game, and how they choose to engage with it. Again, comes back to education, and we're driving that through the data that we capture and how we present that back to our audience.
And Dalraj, any thoughts?
Yeah, so from the betting side of things, if there's one thing that I think that's critical, I think it's more the retention side of things. So, of course, intra-tournament in a tournament like the World Cup, that's important. But actually, the real long-term value for bookmakers from a customer lifetime value perspective is going to be post-tournament. The World Cup is a one-off opportunity, and it's the greatest value for operators is to use that to kind of step change their overall user base long term. So converting one-off volume peaks like this into persistent volume throughout the rest of the cricket and broader sporting calendar, that's why I think retention is so important. That's why I think our ad service is so crucial, because it's all about efficient retention based on predictive value, based on accurate incentivization and personalized recommendations. Because ultimately, what we're talking about here then is, instead of one-off revenue, it's recurring revenue, which is what really drives ultimately shareholder value. So that's what operators should really be caring about. So that's what engagement means for me on the betting side. Of course, all the things we talk about when it comes to acquisition is incredibly important. Prospecting and retargeting. But the real way to generate value, from my perspective, is to focus on and drive long-term retention, to engage user bases and convert them into loyal customers long-term.
And looking to the future now, so Sportradar is a leading innovative technology company. What's on the horizon innovation-wise, Dalraj?
Sure. So we've got all the kind of what I'd call business as usual things that you'd expect, like continually driving coverage growth, expanding side markets and player markets like we discussed earlier, continuing to improve the Cricket Live Match Tracker and Virtuals product using things like computer vision, for example, which is super exciting. But I'd actually say, that's why I say that's kind of business as usual stuff. The more exciting things for me are the broader developments we're doing around our ancillary services. So all the bits and pieces we've been talking about with regards to MTS and ads, and what we've spoken about with regards to retention and end-to-end understanding of the fan, taking that to the next level, I think, is where we're going and what's really exciting, because what that then means is we can bring together insights from all of our Sportradar products. So not just betting products, but also media and streaming and OTT products to drive overall sports fan and cricket insights. So here, for once, I'm taking my betting cap off. It's not just punter insights, but it's fan insights, because that's ultimately what our mission is to address sports fans across the world. And on that journey to get to that mission, I think we're only in the first few kind of overs of that. I think there's a lot of value creation still to be had to drive those end-to-end insights. And it's a really exciting area of the business for me.
And Sam, do you have anything to add?
Just that I think the methods that we are using as we move forward to capture basically faster and richer, deeper data. I think that's where innovation will take its next sort of big leap. So computer vision, rapid processing of information will allow us to automate a lot of the data capture processes and deliver really deep, rich feeds, which we need for that to address that converging sort of stakeholder group of the media, the betting, and the fan. To do that and have those rich insights delivered really quickly and processed and understood by the audience will require us to invest heavily in computer vision as we continue to move forward. And that's why we're so excited about our current position and ultimately being part of the Sportradar group, that the investment in technologies like that underpin all the work that we have been doing over a long period of time and really supercharge our efforts to realise that mission of engaging that worldwide audience.
All right, perfect. And finally, I couldn't not ask this question as we're talking about all of this. The Ashes are coming up. What are your predictions, Sam? I'll come to you first.
I've got the Aussie. I just don't believe England can take 20 wickets in Australian conditions. I think the Aussies 3-1. I'll give England a chance under lights with a swinging ball, but yes, I don't believe that England have the attack in our conditions to ultimately win the Ashes.
And Dalraj?
Listen, nothing pleases me more than seeing Australia crash and burn, so I'm just going to stand here and naively predict and hope for an England win. I say naive because I think Sam is right. The odds are definitely not in my favour. I think we've got England at around 4-1 to win the series, or 5-1 even. But stranger things have happened, and at minimum, I just really hope that it's not an Australia whitewash. Thank you, Sam, for giving us at least one game in your prediction. I really hope that happens. But yeah, we're probably going to need Root to score a century in literally every innings to stand a chance, and maybe then at best we'll get us a draw. But never say never.
All right, well, we'll see how it all goes as the event unfolds. So that's about all we have time for at today's EGR virtual series webinar in partnership with Sportradar. I'd like to thank our speakers, Dalraj Bahia and Sam Taylor, for their time today and for sharing their insights on this topic. If anyone has any further questions from today's discussion or about Sportradar generally, you can see website details on the slide now, so please do feel free to head over there and find out more. Finally, thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your day and week ahead. Goodbye.